The P-61 Black Widow prowls the skies in War Thunder. Let's check it out. The P-61 was the culmination of a lot of disconnected efforts kinda leading to the same end product. Early cooperation between British and American military leaders in 1940 had identified a requirement for a dedicated night fighter with a long loiter time to help defend against German nighttime bomber raids. Also, separate research into radar technology was anticipated to provide a working radar set small enough to fit into a fighter in the immediate future. After this information, separately, passed back through some unofficial channels, the Northrop Company anticipated what was to come, and when the information came through official channels, they were ready and submitted a new proposal to fill the requirement. The designers knew that the specification was going to be an enormous aircraft, and the early radar set was incredibly heavy, and the plane was going to need a tremendous amount of fuel to get the 8-hour endurance required by the contract. Oh, and it had to carry enough firepower to bring down multiple large bombers in a single sortie. The result was the largest fighter produced by the United States during World War II. It was roughly the size of a light bomber. The P-61 also was the first American aircraft designed specifically as a night fighter, and the first fighter anywhere in the world designed from the ground up to use a radar set for air interception. The design went through a lot of changes, which isn't really surprising considering how much cutting-edge technology and experimental construction methods the plane was using, and it only ended up seeing service in the very late stages of World War II. In its intended role, it was unmatched. No other night fighter of the war had as much firepower or as much range combined together with radar-enabled intercepts. Its main shortcoming really was just that it wasn't as fast as other late war aircraft, and with jet fighters already on the drawing board, its days were limited right from the start. The P-61 was retired from regular service just weeks before the Korean War broke out. What we're looking at in War Thunder is the P-61C1, an air defense fighter in rank 3 of the American Air Tree with a battle rating of 4.0. The P-61 carries the Mark X radar set. This is a really basic search-only radar with very short range, but remember, this thing was built in the early 1940s. You get a few different scope range presets, plus this is actually one of the few radar sets in the game that gives the C-scope display in addition to the PPI or B-scope. The plane's primary armament is a set of 4 20mm M2 cannons. These are American versions of the Hispano 404, and as of mid-2023, are plagued by the dreaded reel shatter mechanic. Despite this, the air target's belt is still usually the best for attacking other aircraft, while the ground target's belt can punch through tanks and pillboxes quite a bit easier. The P-61 also gets a powered gun turret with 4 50 caliber machine guns. This turret actually ends up being surprisingly useful, and it fires forward by default. For loadouts, this plane can carry 4 external bombs. Nothing fancy, but the pack of 4 1,000-pounders is enough to take out a base or do some heavy damage in close air support sorties. The flight performance of the P-61 is pretty much what you probably expect. It's closer to a twin-engined bomber than it is to a fighter. The rate of climb isn't especially impressive, its acceleration is average, and you have to get up to altitude if you want to go about approaching its maximum speeds. Its turn performance is similarly lethargic, but that's kind of expected with a big heavy plane like this. One thing the P-61 is actually really good at is diving. It has very effective air brakes, and actually controls really well in a steep dive since you can control your airspeed a little bit better. And as long as you don't overspeed the airframe, the dive performance is excellent. If you can get into a position for it, this makes boom and zoom attacks highly effective. With all that said, I strongly suggest trying to keep your airspeed below about 620 kilometers an hour in a dive in order to avoid structural failures or control lockups. The other big thing to mention, which also probably isn't a surprise, is that the P-61 just isn't very maneuverable. Its turn rate is pretty bad for a fighter, and even smaller twin-engine fighters are going to be able to outturn this plane in most circumstances. If you get sucked into a traditional dogfight, your air combat maneuvering will need to be flawless, and you'll be relying more on mistakes from your opponent in order to gain the upper hand. Even still, the gun turret can surprise you sometimes, and occasionally get off a couple of shots in a flat turn fight. As always, taking the external loadout of bombs is going to hurt your flight performance, so keep that in mind. Flying the P-61 out into air battles is different from most other aircraft in this BR range. The addition of the radar set can actually be a significant factor, and it can help you find targets long before the spotting mechanics kick in, which is especially helpful if you're trying to intercept bombers. This plane gets an air spawn, as it's classified as an air defense fighter, so you get a little boost when you want to climb up for bomber hunting. But even still, a lot of bombers will be able to stay above you even with an optimal climb, so you may have to do a zoom climb into a stall if you want to take a shot on a bomber above you, or if you want to get crafty, you can use your gun turret to fire into a bomber from below instead of angling up for a cannon shot. Less firepower, but easier on your flight situation. In terms of traditional dogfighting and low-altitude combat, I had the best luck when I stuck with my team for cover, since this isn't really a great dogfighter in one-on-one engagements. In arcade battles, as always, everything is much easier, and as you can see from the arcade clip I included in this review, the firepower and flight model buffs in arcade make this plane an absolute monster in arcade battles, and the ability to reload in the air lets you be a lot sloppier with your shooting and take riskier firing solutions without worrying about your ammo count. In terms of ground attack, the P-61 actually does really well here. It's got the payload of a light or medium bomber, enough to take out a base in one pass, and its cannons can pop pillboxes and medium tanks if you get a good firing angle. Flying close air support, the radar set can actually be a pretty significant advantage if you're looking for enemy aircraft to intercept. Plus, the P-61's cluster of cannons is actually really easy to aim on ground targets, and it's got those bombs. So, despite the size of this plane and the fact that it's technically a fighter, it's actually pretty credible flying above a ground battle. Visually, the P-61 is a really unusual looking aircraft, but honestly, I've always liked it. The default skin is just the solid black Night Fighter paint job, but you can also get a pretty fun white paint job off of the marketplace. Overall, it's a good looking plane. Landing the P-61 is surprisingly easy for a large twin-engine prop fighter. It's got tricycle landing gear, so no risk of nosing over, and the air brake makes controlling speed on final approach really easy. You can safely drop gear a bit over 300 kilometers an hour and flaps at around 275. The cockpit on this plane is actually pretty good. The bracing isn't great, but you have surprisingly good visibility and the instruments are easy to find. Aiming the guns isn't too hard in VR either. Overall, it's a surprisingly good cockpit for a large plane like this. To close out on the P-61C1. This plane has excellent firepower. It has a radar set. It gets an air spawn in RB. It's got a powered gun turret and a powerful set of bombs. However, it's a huge target in air combat. It's not a good dogfighter, and its overall flight performance is really quirky. The final verdict on the P-61 Black Widow is that this plane is a surprisingly effective interceptor and pretty good for ground attack. It'll never be a one-on-one turn fighter, but if you adapt your tactics, it won't need to be. As always, thanks for watching.